right, let me take a peek into the control room. Do we have our next guest? I am getting a positive response from Doug. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome our second first-time guest of the evening. He's a film producer. He's an author. He's an activist. He's a popular podcast host. He's a human rights worker. He's the president of the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization, known as HERO for short. Best known for two programs they operate, the Vulnerable People Project and Movie to Movement. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jason Jones. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we get into anything else, how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me on your show, and calling you from the hill country of Texas, where it's a perfect spring day, and I couldn't be doing better.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Now, I've got to start out by asking you about the book. Obviously, you're someone who's been paying attention, which is better than a lot of folks out there. You have written this great tome titled The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset. Now, obviously, there's not enough people that are paying enough attention to the fact that this is a thing that is ongoing, is being pushed upon us by a good number of folks out there. It's actually not released just yet, but it's going to be out early next week on Tuesday, I think it is. The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset. Obviously, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it's not about barbecue.
Yeah, well, that might be my next book. If we fail to stop the Great Reset, I can write a book on how to barbecue cricket meats, Texas style, in place of brisket. So we'll eat cricket. But no, it's I run a human rights organization, the Vulnerable People Project. We have worked now for over 2 decades. I've worked, and before that I was in the military. I was an infantryman, so now going on 3 decades. I've worked in and around war, genocide, and democide. The Vulnerable People Project was founded to advocate and serve communities facing genocide, democide, and trapped in total war. And when COVID erupted on the scene, with the work I do, I bump into the CCP all of the time, and I wrote an op-ed. And the first weeks of in the early part of 2020, where I said, flatten the hunger curve, don't follow the China model, let's not shut down, because if we shut down, it'll lead to famine, reducing food production, processing, and distribution will kill more people than any virus would. And tragically, that's what happened. It went unreported, although David Beasley of the World Food Program won the Nobel Prize for his work trying to ameliorate human suffering and doing his best to hold back the worst famine since World War II. And I'd read some great books by Alex Jones and Glenn Beck and others on the Great Reset, but I thought, there's an element that's missing, because there have been these great books that look at it from the economics, the politics, the governance. But what the Great Reset is really about is undermining the vision of the human person. It's really about anthropology that Western civilization was built up around. And that is the Christian understanding of the human person having an incomparable dignity. And whether it was Nazism, fascism, or communism, totalitarian socialism in the 20th century, the Christian understanding of the human person has been the greatest obstacle to demagogues and ideologues who seek to re-engineer the human family. And I also thought a lot of the books missed really the sense of urgency and how deadly and catastrophic this quote-unquote Great Reset will be, and in fact, how deadly it has already been. So I think what makes the Great Campaign Against the Great Reset different is we lay out the 5 ideological techniques that the globalists use that they're using to try to re-engineer our understanding of the human person and to control the world. And then I have those 5 core principles of a humane civilization that are really rooted in the Western understanding of God, man, and the world. So it presents the problem and it presents the solution, and it sets it within the catastrophe that the globalists are already foisting on the world. But here's the good news. There is a great campaign. There is a campaign against the Great Reset, whether it was the truckers in Canada, whether it were the Green Berets and Navy SEALs who refused to take the vaccine, whether it was the farmers now across Europe, and we see the rise of conservative and populist anti-globalist parties in Western Europe, the Catholic bishops standing up in Africa. So there really is a great campaign to push back on this Great Reset, and this book looks at it. It looks at that.
It is an important message. There's no question about it. It certainly caught my attention when I saw the title, and I'm thinking, because I've read some of the Glenn Beck books as well, and he does make a lot of good points. But like you, I thought there was some stuff missing, because there does seem to be this overall arcing push from the global leftists. I don't even dare to call them elitists, because a lot of them are beyond elite, the ones that see the rest of us as just either an obstacle or things that are taking up their space. But they do attack personhood in every way. They try to crush the soul. Everything they've done is designed to do that. And I'm glad to have a chance to talk with somebody here who not only recognized it, but decided it's important to make sure that people can see that. Because it doesn't matter if we're talking about the war against the farmers. It doesn't matter if we're talking about how they want to use the religion of climate change as a way to try and reduce quality of life, even though they know that everything that we've done is actually works to improve not only the quality but the safety, and has increased the longevity. It's been good for humanity, but then also personhood. Period. They want little automatons to do what they want, and they want them in the numbers that they'll permit them. It's something as simple as abortion. I very rarely even use the term abortion. I usually just say the murder of preborn baby humans. I go out of my way to say that every time, because they're not unborn, they're preborn. They are humans. They are babies, and it doesn't matter at what stage of life they're in. And one of the things that's really upset me, and I know that you've been a little vocal on this as well, is the way a lot of Republicans recently have kind of ran away from the pro-life stance since this Arizona State Supreme Court ruling that basically eliminates, it snaps back this law that existed when it was still a territory, and it basically eliminates all abortion with the exception of if the life of the mother, and that is it. And I get that politically it's not been a winner, so if you want to win, you should take a neutral stance. I think Donald Trump, while I was still disappointed, I think from a political standpoint, saying, okay, we're just going to put this back to the states and leave it at that, his initial campaign announcement, I think that was good. But since then, I've heard a lot of people associated with Arizona in particular take it a step further, where they practically abandoned the idea of standing up for life. And if we can't recognize the personhood of these preborn children, and we can't stand up and defend the absolute least of these as we're commanded, what is the point of even having the party? Too many people fail to recognize life for what it is, and that is the big danger that the Great Reset puts out. And that is really essentially the push back against the Great Reset, is the push to reclaim personhood, right?
Yeah, well, in fact, you brought up the climate cult. I have the five ideological weapons of the Great Reset. The first one is victimism. It's victimism, Gnosticism, transhumanism, anti-humanism, which is highlighted by the abortion industry and the war on the preborn. Did I say Gnosticism? Transhuman, anti-humanism, Gnosticism, victimism, and the climate cult. Those are the five ideologies of control that the globalists are using to divide and conquer. And then the five core principles of Western civilization that we need to advocate to roll back the Great Reset, the first one is personalism. The Christian understanding of the human person is a creature made in the image and likeness of God that has an inviolable dignity and worth. And Roe versus Wade, like slavery and segregation before it, the abortion culture undermines not only the founding principle of the United States, because we're the only country that was founded on a vision of the human person, and it's embedded in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. But we're also, it's the principle that founded the West. The Western civilization wasn't founded with Socrates or Cicero. It was founded when the second person of the Trinity became man, and theologians and philosophers, Christians for centuries, tried to understand, what does it mean to be made in God's image? What does that mean about us? What does that mean about God? What does it mean for God to be three persons in one, homoousios? What does it mean that God becomes man? What does that mean about our dignity? And that's what created the most humane and prosperous society in the history of the world. So you're right. The tragic mistake that the hack consultants for the Republicans are making, and they're really undermining the GOP's chances of success, it's not the abortion issue. It's the ham-fisted, cowardly, and clumsy way in which they're dealing with the issue. First thing, for the most vocal, active wing of the GOP, they're pro-life. The ones that write the most checks and make the most phone calls to get out to vote, knock on the most doors, are pro-life. If you suppress them, if you suppress their willingness to knock on doors and make phone calls and write checks, you've undermined the GOP's chances for success. I wrote an article several months ago saying this is exactly what the Democrats are trying to do: lure Trump and the Republicans away from their base. You cannot win running away from your base. You also look at the tremendous gains that we have made, the GOP has made with Latinos and African Americans. It has to do with abortion and the social issues. But sort of the rhetoric around this Arizona law going, when Roe versus Wade overturned, the laws went back to the state laws on the books. First of all, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone unless you're uninformed and ignorant to how the law works. Obviously, when Roe versus Wade overturned, the state's laws would go back into effect. But what people don't understand is that Roe v. Wade was regressive, because the laws that were put on the books in the Civil War era across the West in the United States were prohibiting abortion, were the fruit of the American Medical Association. As these New England doctors, who were the grandchildren of Puritans, Christians, came across the country, and they went into these small Western towns, they were startled to discover brothels in every town. And the brothel was the abortion clinic by day and the brothel by night. The men went there at night. Their wives went there for abortions during the day, because the owners of the brothels were the ones that performed abortions. So rather than running away from the issue, the GOP should say, we should celebrate the progress that the American Medical Association brought to the Western states and territories during the Civil War era that shut down the brothels and the butcher shops that were dotting the towns across Arizona and across the West. This was progress. And what Roe versus Wade did, it erased the progress that the American Medical Association, when it was grounded in the Hippocratic Oath and Western morals and tradition, enacted. The other thing we should be talking about is how we've rolled back the agenda of Margaret Sanger, the racists and the eugenicists. We should be dealing with this issue head on. We should be talking about how chemical abortions, the abortifacients that are used, the hormones, the powerful drugs and hormones that are used to induce the destruction of the innocent child in the womb now through chemical abortions, is not only devastating to women's bodies and kills children, it pollutes our water supply. So the GOP could be winning on the abortion issue, but it's as if they're all meaning Mitt Romney, who used to – remember when Mitt Romney said, I'm severely conservative, as if he had the flu. I have a severe flu. I'm severely conservative. They talk about being pro-life as it's something to be shameful. And I would say this. If you're listening to this and you're pro-abortion, you should be ashamed of yourself. It's absolutely despicable. To advocate the destruction of the innocent child in the womb is reprehensible and repulsive. It doesn't matter to me what the spirit of the age says, the Supreme Court says or doesn't say. I know that we all understand that the biological beginning of the human person is fertilization, conception, and we all understand, hopefully, unless we're a demented lunatic, that we should protect the vulnerable and the weak from violence. And that's what abortion is. As you said, it's lethal violence against the most vulnerable members of the human family. There's no hope in rolling back the Great Reset if we can't protect the child in the womb. Why should we protest satanic rituals at the opening of CERN? Why should we protest taxpayer dollars going for corrupt and ugly modern art? Why should we protest they're making our children wear masks to go to school? Why should we protest any of that if we lack the courage to say, hey, no more killing the child in the womb? Those days are over. If we don't have the courage to say that, you're right. There is no hope in defeating the Great Reset. But here's the reality, that the pro-life movement is the largest, most powerful and diverse social movement in the history of the United States, especially influential with minority communities and the youth. The future of America is pro-life. If the GOP seeks to lose by hiding from the issue or messaging poorly on the issue, that's a devastating decision. Victimism, which is the first chapter of my book, that's the key to understanding the globalists' push for power. What victimism is feigning concern for the vulnerable to acquire wealth, power, and prestige. So they say that they want open borders because they care so much about migrants, but really what they want to do is economically exploit millions and millions of migrants in a dangerous underground economy. They're indifferent to the social and familial disruption that our open borders have caused in communities across Central and South America. They're indifferent to how immoral and dishonorable it is for us as a nation to lure millions of people away from their families into a dangerous underground economy where they'll be exploited. They ignore how several Boeing 777s are crashing, I guess, every week, and the equivalent of young people dying from fentanyl deaths. They're indifferent to the Chinese military-age men coming across the border as Islamist extremists, or weapons going from us to them and drugs coming from the south to the north. To truly care for the vulnerable, for example, is to secure the border. They say that they're worried about young women, having to seek dangerous abortions, and that's why they want safe and legal abortion. Well, the reality is no abortion's safe, and they can care less about young women. What this is about is their relentless drive to reduce population, their relentless drive to, as Margaret Sanger said, rip up the useless weeds of the poor and the minorities. It's a war on the weak. And so what the great campaign against the Great Reset is it's to battle against those globalists and those victimists who use the vulnerable to amass power to exploit the vulnerable.
Well, yeah, you're encompassing so many different aspects, Jason, but it's all part of the same, thing, and that's kind of where we usually run into trouble. It's difficult to do what you have done through writing the book and through your messaging and the work that you've done through Heroes as well. You manage to articulate all these different moving parts, and you focus on one at a time, and you do the good that you can be done, but we have to be wary of everything else that's happening. And you're absolutely right. You're not demonstrating compassion by encouraging policies on the border that allows the cartels to make more money and put more people in harm's way. You're not being compassionate to the poor when you offer up the opportunity for them to create a huge hole in their soul by murdering a preborn child that could have been the next great artist, or could have been the next insane serial killer. But they have the right as a human being to life, and then to make the mistakes that they may make. You don't know until it happens. Jason, so much more to talk about, so many things. I would love to get you back on again sometime soon to talk about your organization, to get even more in depth with the topics here, because there's just so much to cover. And that's part of how the elites have been able to move this agenda so far forward, is there's almost too much for one person to wrap their mind around. But before we say our final goodbyes, please let everybody know where they can find your work. Share all the websites. Let them know where they can find the book, and feel free to share any social media handles and platforms that you're inviting people to follow you on.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I'll come on anytime. Our organization, our work at the Vulnerable People Project, is vulnerablepeopleproject.com. You can get our book at thegreatcampaign.org or wherever you buy books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, support your local booksellers. And you can follow my podcast, The Jason Jones Show, where we cover the issues of the vulnerable communities, whether it's the Christians in Artsakh who are ethnically cleansed in the fall, or advocating for the Uyghur and Chinese-occupied East Turkestan, or fighting for Afghan allies who are still in hiding from Islamist extremists in the wake of Joe Biden's ham-fisted withdrawal from the country. So that's The Jason Jones Show, The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset, wherever you buy your books. And it'll be comes out on Tuesday in Audible, Kindle, and the hard copy.
All right. Again, thank you so much for coming on with us today, Jason. I appreciate you, and I certainly appreciate all the work you're doing. Godspeed to you, sir, and keep up all the great work.
All right. God bless you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Jason Jones, and this is Tapp into the Truth. We reset the hour. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.